Firstly, a disclaimer. Don't copy this work because it will get flagged for plagiarism. This work has been submitted to Newcastle University in my first year, so it's not amazing and it's definitely not perfect. This is part of a video series that I'm currently doing where I read out my essays and talk about the grade I got on them, so you can see where I went wrong and then hopefully learn from my mistakes. I also want to add that I'm very bad at reading because I'm a little bit stupid, so I'm very sorry if I make lots of errors when trying to read these out. And I also don't mean to offend anybody by saying that, it's just a personal thing. So for this paper I got 50%, which is bordering a 2-2. Which means that it's probably going to be quite hard to read. I already know that I cannot pronounce the name of the philosopher, and so I'm probably going to just replace his name with M every time I'm trying to reference him. Okay, cool. Maimonides claims that the description of God by means of negative terms is the only sound description. However, this statement can be questioned and validated by using arguments from Brian Davies, Christian thinking, and Augustine. M via Negativa is widely acknowledged as being correct and that will be rhetorical during this essay. Here one will explore what M means by his statement. Then his meanings will be analysed with a constructive vision from both sides, and then we will conclude with why the pros outweigh the cons. M's claim is often referred to as the via negativa, which is a philosophical approach to theology, which asserts that no finite concepts or attributes can be adequately used of God, but only negative terms. This definition is describing how when we talk about God, it can only be by using negative language because otherwise we would be limiting God in some aspect. M states this theory in his work The Guide of the Perplexed and further defines it by utilizing and outlining key terms such as divine attributes, which are characteristics which we can say about God, but only in negative terms, otherwise it would limit God. The challenge of falsification principle can strongly support M's via negativa. This is a theory that has been laid out by Karl Popper, based on how we collect evidence for a scientific theory. Here it is explained that for something to be scientific it must be able to be proven false. Therefore, we must look for evidence which falsifies our hypothesis, and if such evidence is found, then it is possible to use that object in scientific inquiry. This theory therefore supports via negativa in saying that when we conduct scientific research to find out more about something, we should look for reasons why it may not be what we are looking for exactly. This evidence makes the statements made by M stronger. Brian Davies criticises M, though, by saying what something doesn't give any indication of what it is. If we can only say what God isn't, then we can't understand him at all. What he suggests here is that using negative language to describe God only tells us what he isn't. Therefore, it does not deepen our understanding of God. By stating the characteristics that an object doesn't possess is giving us no new knowledge of what an object is. Davies gives the reader an example by stating, if you try to guess what a something in my room is, and I reject every suggestion you make, you'll get no idea about what is there. In the same way, God is not a being, or God does not have limited power, is not telling us any new information about what God is. By using negative language, we cannot fully understand God, and therefore there is no point in attempting to describe God. In this way, negative theology is pointless in telling us new information about God, because it doesn't seem particularly helpful to say what something is not. In the statement provided by the question, the via negativa is using non-cognitive and descriptive language. Non-cognitive is a term meaning that ethical sentences are not expressing propositions and are therefore not able to be confirmed as true or false. In other words, they are truth-apt. For example, do not kill cannot be confirmed as a true or false command because there is no proposition expressed. This use of language helps humans understand God in simpler terms rather than including details which could cause confusion. This leads to M's theory of divine attributes, in which there are two distinct categories under which they can be found, essential or accidental. An essential attribute can be described as something is, such as how a human is a rational animal, whereas an accidental attribute is the state of something or in terms of M, an essence. So, when we read this, can decipher what M means when he describes God to be simply one. He is saying that God needs no definition as nothing can be added to God's simplicity. All we know is that God necessarily exists. This means that God must exist and does not depend on anything else for his existence. However, even if we state that God is not something, it is still asserting something about him, as even negative language is somewhat describing characteristics of God. For example, to say God doesn't lack power is to say that God has power. Now we must discuss why M could be complicating language to create the same conclusion. According to Aquinas, the only knowledge that we can have of God is to know that we don't know him, and to cope with our lack of understanding, humans use words such as perfect. So by way of negation, we are understanding perfection as lacking nothing. M has therefore chosen to use negative language because our lack of understanding, we cannot label what we do not know, we can only attempt to understand it better using our limited minds. A negative attribute is describing the characteristics of something using negative language, whereas a positive attribute is describing the characteristics of something using positive language. According to M, positive attributes can be applied to created things and not to the creator, as he states, "You must understand that the description of God by means of negative terms is the only sound description, and implies altogether in no circumstances a lack of perfection in God. His description by positive terms, on the other hand, comports polytheism and a lack of perfection in God. Therefore, if we were to use positive language to describe God, it would be implying that he is imperfect, as it suggests that he is becoming something rather than that he is simply being and existing necessarily." He progresses to state that we can apprehend only that he is, not what he is, because God is not a thing. God is being itself and exists necessarily without a need for definition. By saying what God is not, we are not limiting him in any way. Using negative language can guide the mind to the utmost limit of what man can apprehend of God. By this, M is saying that humans lack the capacity to understand God is any other way than through negative language without limiting him, as we would if we were using positive language. This is another credible argument for M, as it persuades the reader that positive language can be unstable when applied to God, as we do not have the capacity to know what God is, hence why it is more reliable to say what God is not. This provides a more accurate description for a human's limited mind, rather than providing a false description that we may get when using positive terminology. The understanding Maimonides creates about negative apothology is therefore more accurate than the previous positive understanding commonly used in traditions such as Christianity or by other philosophers. On the other hand, it should be considered whether language is truly valuable if it is negative. It is considered valuable information to know that God is omnibenevolent, because it gives the reader a clear depiction of God in their heads as a being of unconditional love. However, it is not valuable to say that God does not lack love, as it also doesn't tell us whether he obtains the capacity to love. Using negative language, such as saying that God does not lack love, makes it extremely difficult for the reader to have a clear understanding of the characteristics of God which humans feel that they need. An answer M provides, though, is the conception of three possibilities where it may be acceptable to make positive statements about God. M begins with the first possibility being if the language used is being allegorical or symbolic about God, as this allows humans to understand him on a higher level, which is compatible with our limited human thinking. An example he uses to explain this would be when he says God's relation to the world is that of the captain of the ship, as he is saying that God guides us here on earth and captains the universe. This language is easier for humans to understand as it gives us metaphors and allegory to explain how God intervenes with the universe. He develops this further to ensure the reader that he is not interfering God to be actually a captain by stating, "This is not a true relation and not even remotely resembles the real one." However, it serves to guide the mind to the idea that God governs the universe, meaning that he supports it and keeps it in order as it should be. So he is suggesting that although God shouldn't be referred to as a captain of our ship, it is a good form of symbolic language to help humans understand God. A clear opposition to the use of negative language would be in Christianity, which is based on revelations. In the Latin Bible, God is said to be indefinitum, unlimited. But if we are using via negativa, then we would have to say that this is incorrect, as saying that God is unlimited means that there is positive language that can be used for him. Instead, M would suggest that we say that God is without limited power, thus not defining him as defining God limits him. This type of language would be circular and wouldn't make sense. However, Christians and Jews would agree with this because they know from the scripture that God is omnipotent, and to go against what is said in the scripture would be blasphemous. This is why M conceived of the second possibility, which he calls concealed negation. Concealed negation is when someone uses positive language to speak about God, but subconsciously they are actually suggesting negative language. For example, to say God is omniscient, they are verbally expressing that God is all-knowing. However, subconsciously they are revealing that God does not lack knowledge. Therefore, although they are saying God is omniscient as a positive statement, they are still using a form of via negativa. The aim of this message is designed to lead to ultimate truth about God rather than leading people to false presumptions that have been made about God in the past. The third possibility that M allows to counter negative theology in a way that still encapsulates his statement about it being the only sound way of speaking about God is the attribute of action, which is the means that nothing can be added to the essence of God, as God is simple. Therefore, we can't put labels on God because nothing can be added to what God is. Augustine of Hippo supports that nothing can be added to God as God is impenetrable. However, that also means that one must not be able to speak of God in a negative way. Augustine states, "If you comprehend, it is not God. If you are able to comprehend, it is because you mistook something else for God. If you almost comprehend, it is again because you allowed your own thoughts to deceive you." Here, Augustine explains that if the speaker is using negative language to speak about God, then the speaker does not really understand God, and that the speaker is allowing their thoughts that they have created about God to deceive them. Therefore, we need to distinguish between what God really is and how we wish to speak about him. In conclusion, M has argued his claim that the description of God by means of negative terms is the only sound description of God, using his three possibilities of positive language, which he explained to conceal negative language or symbolic meaning. The evidence suggests that M claim is accurate, as any other form of language would cause the speaker to limit God and contradict themselves. Even throughout the arguments of Brian Davis, who argued that using negative predicates does not tell us anything new about the subject, or through Augustine, who argued that it is impossible to understand God if speaking negatively, as these are embedded false assumptions in the human mind. Negative theology is still able to persuade the readers that this is the correct method of speaking about God. Looking back on that, I would say that the grading was probably inaccurate to my understanding, because actually that wasn't that difficult to read. The only thing that I noticed throughout that is that I am quite repetitive when I could have perhaps explained further rather than just repeating the same statements over and over again. So that is the only bit that I did notice probably would have downgraded me. Again, my grammar wasn't perfect, but it was better in this one, and my quotes weren't as misplaced as they were in my other essays. However, I do believe that this one probably deserved a higher grade than it got, though, you know, there's still something to learn from it, so that is what matters when it's first year, I guess. Please comment below on what you think about that, and also leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Tell me what you think about this series that I've got going on, and please subscribe if you want to learn more about philosophy. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye, guys.